This is question number 5 on homework 3. This is a question about pro forma balance sheet and external funds needed calculation. Basically, we need to use two ways to calculate this EFN, as we will see. So let me read the setup briefly. Sherry Colby, CFO of Charming Florist Limited, has created the firm's pro forma balance sheet for the next fiscal year. Sales are projected to grow by 15% to $460 million. So notice here, the 460 million means that it's the projected number. It's not the current sales. But from this number and the growth rate of sales, we can determine the current sales to be that should be straightforward to calculate. Let me enlarge this. So this basically is 460 divided by 1 plus 15%. So that's my so let me change the format. Right now I believe this is the so this is 400, right? 400 million. So that's the current sales. Current assets, fixed assets, and short-term debt are 15%, 70%, and 5% of sales, respectively. So these items on the balance sheet vary proportionally with sales. And the company pays out 25% of its net income in dividends. So this 25% here means that's the dividend payout ratio. The company currently has $130 million of long-term debt. And we know that long-term debt generally do not vary proportionally with sales. And 58 million in common stock par value. The common stock also does not vary proportionally with sales. These two variables, as we will see on the pro forma balance sheet. Pro forma here means the projected, estimated balance sheet for the future date. These numbers will not change proportionally with sales. The profit margin is 12%. The profit margin based on our session 2 on financial issues, that's net income divided by sales. So net income divided by sales is 12%. So part A, prepare the current balance sheet for the firm using the projected sales figure. Actually, we have already figured out the current sales. This is why don't I put this here, and this is basically sales, and this is current, just to be clear. So we need to prepare the current balance sheet. And we know that on the current balance sheet, we have the current assets, long-term asset, which is fixed assets. That's on the left-hand side of the balance sheet, on the asset side. And on the right-hand side, that's the short-term debt, long-term debt, and common stock, and retained earnings. So we have these basic items on the balance sheet. So the assets, we have the current assets here is 50% of sales. And we know that sales, say A, current assets, that's 15% of this sales. Sales is 400. So forgot to put equal sign. That's very important. Otherwise, Excel cannot take this as a calculation function. Now it recognizes this as a calculation. So current assets is $60 million. And so let me put this as 60 million. So I guess all these units here should be, oh, enter your answers in dollars, not millions of dollars. So why don't I just put this as dollars? So I need to put this to be this. So this will change to be 6 million, you see. So this will be 6000000. And the next item on the asset side of the balance sheet is fixed assets. So fixed assets is 70% of the sales. So fixed assets. So why don't I, because this is I'm preparing the balance sheet. So this is current balance sheet. So current assets and then fixed assets. Fixed assets is 70% equals 70% of this sales. So that's $28 million. So this is $28 million fixed assets. So that gives me $34 million total assets. So that's on the left-hand side of the balance sheet. On the right-hand side, we start from the current liabilities. Current liabilities is the short-term debt here. Do we have accounts payable? Because if you pull down this, we have the accounts payable choice here. I don't believe we have the accounts payable here, so we don't have to worry about that item here. So short-term debt is 5% of sales. So that's on the right-hand side. Why don't I put here? Short-term debt is 5% of sales. So that's $2 million. Actually, $20 million. Yes, $20 million. So I guess something should be wrong somewhere. Yes, this would be a 60 million. Actually, I messed up with one unit. So that's very, very important. I need to put this as 60 million rather than 60 million rather than 6 million. So this is 280 million. $280 million. So that's very, very important. So now this becomes $340 million. And so short-term debt becomes $20 million. So this is $20 million. $20 million. So you need to be very, very careful. As you can see, even I sometimes can make this kind of mistake by missing 1 0. That can give a very unfortunate make you losing the points. And the next item here is the long-term debt. Long-term debt that's directly given to be 130 million. So that's 130 million dollars. And then next one is common stock. Common stock. We have the common stock that's also directly provided, $58 million. $58 million. $58 million. And then finally, we have the accumulated retained earnings. The sum of these two becomes the total equity. We are not directly provided with this variable, but given the property that our balance sheet has to be balanced, which means that total assets has to be equal to the sum of liabilities and equity. So that means we can now actually fill out this total liabilities and equity to be the same as the total assets. And then we can back up these two items. How can we back up? Because we know that the total liabilities, which is the sum of the short-term debt and long-term debt, that's just the sum of these two numbers. And that will become, oh, I forgot to put this long-term debt. That's that's directly provided actually. So the sum of it's the total liabilities, which is the sum. So equal sum function, that's the sum function in Excel, and pull all the way down to the last item that you want to sum up. So that becomes $150 million. And then we have the common stock, and this is $58 million. So we know that the total equity has to be this 340 total liabilities plus total equity, $340 million minus total liabilities, right? So that's the total equity, because the sum of these two is this total liabilities plus equity, which is $340 million. So we know we can back up the total equity to be $190 million. So that gives me $190 million. $190 million. So finally, accumulated retained earnings, we can also back up. Accumulated retained earnings is simply the difference between this total equity and common stock, because the sum of common stock and accumulated retained earnings is just the total equity. So this will be this minus common stock. That gives me $132 million. So $132 million. Yes. So I guess we can check the work just to be sure we have got the answers correct so far. Yes, good job. Just give ourselves applause. So now return to question. Part B, based on the sales growth forecast, how much does the company need in external funds for the upcoming fiscal year using the EFN equation from the textbook? So if you check the textbook or my PowerPoint slides, so how can you find my PowerPoint slides? Just go to our SciCai website and go to our lessons. So for each week we have a lesson session, and this refers to session 3 under the required readings. It always has the PowerPoint lecture slides. So you just click and download and then open it. So just pull down, and this is basically the equation to calculate. Yeah, I guess that's the first time this equation appears on the slides. So this is basically the equation to calculate the EFN, external financing needed, which is basically assets divided by sales times this delta here. It's a triangle sign that's pronounced as delta. It's a Greek letter. So this delta here means the change. Here is the increase in sales, and then minus the SPO and spontaneous. That's short for spontaneous liabilities. So the spontaneous liabilities means that these liabilities change proportionally with sales. So that's the short-term debt in our question. Because we said that long-term debt and equity generally they don't change proportionally with sales. Only the short-term debt, sometimes they change with the sales, proportionally with the sales. And divided by sales times the change, delta means the change in sales, minus PM refers to profit margin, times the projected sales. So that's the future sales. So in our question, that's actually directly given. If you recall, that's on the first sentence, sales are projected to grow by 15% to $460 million. So that's projected sales. And times 1 minus D. So D here is the dividend payout ratio. So that's the what's the percentage of this net income that's paid out as dividend. So that's the dividend payout ratio, D. So that's also given in this question, because you see the company pays out 25% of its net income in dividends. So that means the B here is 25%. So we can figure out all these numbers, and then we can use this equation to calculate the EFN. So now let me put the numbers into my into the Excel. So equals assets divided by sales. So assets, go back to the assets. Assets, that's $340 million divided by sales. Sales, we going back to our calculation sheet. That's $40 million. Actually, $400 million. So that's the first thing. So why don't I just calculate here, just to be clear, to close to the, or maybe calculate here. So EFN. So this is 340 million dollars. Recall that's the total assets, $340 million divided by sales, and then times the change in sales, the increase in sales. The current sales is $400 million and projected sale is $460 million. So that means the change is $60 million. So divided by times 60 million. Okay, so that's the first item. Minus, so go back to our formula, minus the spontaneous liabilities. We said that this refers to the short-term debt. So the short-term debt is this number here, $20 million divided by sales, and then times the change in sales, $60 million. and minus profit margin. Profit margin is 12% times projected sales. So that's $460 million. That's given by the setup. And then times 1 minus the profit, or 1 minus the dividend payout ratio. 1 minus the dividend payout ratio is 25%. So that's giving me 66 or $6,600,000. So I need to put this as $6,600,000. So again, let me check my work so far. Just make sure we got this number correct. Yes. Okay, so go on. So you can see that once you understand the setup, once you know where to find the formula and you understand the mechanism of the formula, just plug in the numbers and just be careful. As I said, you need to be super careful, especially the number of units. Sometimes that can make you losing the points very easily. And then part C1, and this I believe might be the most difficult, the most challenging part of this question. Say part 1, C-1, prepare the firm's pro forma balance sheet for the next fiscal year. So pro forma means the projected. So now we know the future sales, $460 million. And we know that some items on the balance sheet will change proportionally with sales, and those are the current assets, fixed assets, and short-term debt. But other items, they will not change proportionally with sales. So you need to just put down their number as they are in the current balance sheet. And then we can also figure out the new accumulated retained earnings. This number actually is not the same as this number. Why? Because we know the future sales and we know that the profit margin, and we said profit margin means the net income divided by sales. So from that we can figure out net income, and from net income and the dividend payout ratio, because dividend payout ratio is the dividend divided by net income, so we can also figure out the dividend. And then from the dividend, the part of the net income that's not paid as dividend is called addition to retained earnings. So we can just add that number to this current accumulated retained earnings to obtain the new projected accumulated retained earnings. So that means on the pro forma balance sheet, current assets, fixed assets, short-term debt, and accumulated earnings, we can all figure out. And three of these short-term debt, fixed assets, current assets, we can figure out these terms based on their percentage to sales, right? 15%, 17%, and 5%. And for the accumulated retained earnings, we can figure out the new number by the process I just described. And for the long-term debt and current common stock, we cannot figure out the new number without additional information. So we can just leave the number as they are in the current balance sheet. And then the new sum of the liabilities and equity may not equal to the total assets. And their difference between the total assets and the liabilities and equity is the external financing needed. So that's the second way to estimate the EFN based on the pro forma balance sheet. But then part C1, we need to figure out this pro forma balance sheet first. So we start from this. Why it doesn't allow me to enter any number here? That's kind of weird. I see, because I need to return to question first. Yes. So now I can enter the answer now. Start from current assets. So you see, with this change, with the Excel, actually I can easily change this number. So once I change this to be projected, and change this to be just for $60 million directly, all these numbers which change proportionally with this sales will change automatically. So that's another very convenient way to use Excel. So we can just directly plug in this current assets and fixed assets into this new pro forma balance sheet. So current assets is $69 million, and fixed assets is $322 million. And so the total assets, just the sum of this. Total assets, it's just the sum of these two numbers. Why don't I put just for convenience for view, total assets. Oh, maybe it's not just this number plus this number. That's easier. $391 million. $391 million. Okay, on the right hand side, we have the short-term debt. That will also change proportionally with sales. And the new figure here is the $230 million. Actually, $23 million. $23 million. And long-term debt. So this number will not change, as I said. So we can just put down this current number, $130 million. $130 million. And common stock will also not change. It's not that they will not change. It's just that we don't know their new number, so we just put down their current number. And then we can figure out the difference between total assets and the sum of the liabilities and equity. And that's the external financing needed. And then we can figure out whether we want to issue more debt or we want to issue more stock. So that's the way that the pro forma statement is generated, and how the external financing needed is estimated. So we just common stock, $58 million. Yeah. And this accumulated retained earnings, the final item on the balance sheet. Oh, this number needs some calculation. It's no longer the difference because the current balance sheet is balanced. The new balance sheet, based on the pro forma statement, the process, the procedure, the process we just described is not necessarily balanced because we haven't considered the new financing yet, new long-term debt or the new common stock yet. So it's not necessarily balanced. So we cannot use the way that we used in the current balance sheet to figure out the accumulated retained earnings. We back up, right? We know the sum of the liabilities and equity, and then we back up to get the total equity, and then we back up to get accumulated retained earnings. We cannot use that way anymore because, as I said, the new pro forma balance sheet here is not balanced yet, so we cannot use that way. But how can we figure out the how can we figure out I need to put down this number will not this is current ARE 132 as we just calculated $132 million. Yeah, and then why don't I just put down somewhere down here? Okay, $132 million. New addition. Once we figure out the addition to retained earnings, and then we can just add the addition to retained earnings to this current accumulated retained earnings to figure out the new projected accumulated retained earnings. So the key here is to figure out the addition to the retained earnings. How can we do that? We said from the setup, we are provided with the profit margin. From the profit margin and the new projected sales, because this margin we can assume it doesn't. It's generally assumed that the margin will not change with the sales. So, why do I add more process here? So, new projected net income, that's profit margin times the projected sales. This is projected net income, $55 million, $200,000. And from the projected net income and the dividend payout ratio, we can figure out the dividend, projected dividend. That's simply this projected net income times 25%. And then addition to the retained earnings is just the difference between the projected net income minus projected dividend. Or if you want, you can see that this number here is $41,400,000. So this number here is this. If you want, you can also calculate this number by using the projected net income, but use that to directly. So use this directly times 1 minus the dividend payout ratio, 25%. It's the same for $41,400,000. So now we can just add up. Oh, this is projected ARE. This is just simply this number plus addition to the retained earnings. So we have the $173,400,000. So this means this number here is $173,400,000. So total equity is just so this number is this. So we can just put the projected. Let me just put this projected equals okay. And total equity is just the sum of these two. $231,400,000. So the total liabilities and equity, total liabilities plus total equity equals this number plus this number. So that gives me 400,000. So now you see, as I said, the pro forma balance sheet as of now is not balanced yet. Total assets is not equal to total liabilities and equity. And that's because we don't know what happens to long-term debt and the common stock. So we have to put down their current number. So that's not necessarily the case. But why do we do that? Because we want to figure out how much new financing we need. That's the external financing needed. And then we can assign that number to how much debt we need to issue, how much stock we need to issue. So that's the process. So let me check my work again. Okay, luckily I sort of got all the numbers right. Oh, sometimes I may got these numbers wrong, so I need to check my work again. So this is just very lucky. So final part, calculate the external funds needed. So we already did that calculation in part B. So if you're absolutely sure about that number, you can just copy that number, but that's not advised. Why? Because that's not enhancing your understanding of this whole process. This external financing needed is after part C-1. Part C-1 is to prepare the firm's pro forma balance sheet. And so we can also figure out this EFN based on the pro forma balance sheet. How? We can just take the difference between the total assets and the sum of the total liabilities and equity. And just that's how much new financing need to make the balance sheet balanced. So that's another way to figure out the so EFN. It's kind of messy, so I apologize for that. So I just want you to focus on the process rather than my organizing of the screen. So EFN is simply the difference between the total assets and the sum of the liabilities and equity. So that gives me $6,600,000. Actually, you can see that number is the same as what we got before. The same as what we got before. So we can be absolutely sure about our work now. So good job. Okay, so let me stop here.